I'm Jasmine Woodard Rose, and my family is excited to invite Homeworthy along as we renovate our nearly 200-year-old Charleston home filled with history. Now, when we bought the house, it was like full frat house. We'll be designing its next chapter, transforming it from a makeshift college frat house to a fabulous family home. And it's just gonna be a really magical place that will hopefully be forever. After a decade living in New York, my husband Evan and I are eager to shape this Southern home for our family, who we know will have countless memories here in the years to come. It's a design journey we're just beginning, and we're so excited to show you around.
You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story.
Hey Homeworthy, I'm Jasmine. Welcome back to my ongoing renovation here in Charleston, South Carolina. Today, I am so excited to introduce you all to my friend Brittany, who is an architectural historian. Brittany has done the Lord's work. She has uncovered all of our home history. She's put so much effort into learning about the neighborhood, and she's going to be here to tell us all about it. I'm so excited. I can't wait for you to hear it, and I can't wait to learn so much more. So let's go. Excited to welcome my good friend Brittany here in our home. So Brittany is a wonderful architectural historian here in Charleston, and she has been truly doing the Lord's work of digging deep and investigating everything there is to know about this special home that we live in.
So I'm Brittany Lavelle Tulla. As Jasmine said, I am an architectural historian. I have my master's in historic preservation, and my passion was really to help humanize these old buildings, to help people understand the places and the humans that occupied these spaces so that they can live in them and honor them and celebrate them or commemorate them in such a bigger way. So one of our favorite things to do is house histories, and that is where we assist homeowners in understanding just the journey of the home that they're living in and the spaces and the rooms. And this one with Jasmine has been epic, and I cannot wait to share with you what we found.
I'm so excited. So first things first, I would love to just understand a little bit more about the early history, because from my quick Google search, I do think it's pretty interesting what I found, but What did you find?
So this house is fascinating in so many ways, especially when it comes to when it was built and the architecture and the character, which I know we'll get into. Yeah. But it was built as a traditional Charleston single house in the late 1850s. So we have that typical Charleston single house floor plan, 1-room wide, 2-room deep with a side piazza. And what makes this house very interesting is that it was built by a master builder. So if you
what does that mean?
If you think about like a contractor,
Okay.
Someone who's building houses in construction,
Okay.
and he's building it for himself, Louis Reb, and his young family. And
Okay.
so in the 1850s, we have architectural styles. We have the Greek Revival fading out and this Italianate fading in, and architecture was just like fashion historically. So these trends come in and out. And so what we're seeing in this house is really iconic of the mid-19th century. And your mantels, your cornice work, the exterior, all of it is kind of encapsulating that 1850s architecture. But as we go through time, of course, we know that the Civil War begins in 1861, and it does begin here in Charleston, which is a story for a different time. But by the Reconstruction era in 1870, we have a Black family purchasing this property.
So I was right?
You were right.
Google was right?
You were right, but it wasn't the family that Google said it was.
No, it was
and
not.
That is one of the best parts about house histories, is that there are so many myths and legends, especially in a city like Charleston. And there is sometimes some truth to these legends and myths. But what makes doing house history so powerful is that we get to find out the truth, and the truth is always better. And in this case, it's the family of George Shrewsbury. George Shrewsbury was a butcher. And what is very interesting about his story is that he was part of a population of Black citizens who were free before the Civil War.
Wow.
So here in Charleston, and actually many southern states and many cities across the United States, had a free Black population. And in Charleston, they were known as the Brown elite. And they really had the same cultural institutions, the same way of life as the white citizens on the peninsula, but they created this autonomy in the northern section of Charleston.
Wow.
And so that's really where they're able to conduct their own businesses. They have their
Wow.
own networks. And so George Shrewsbury had a lot of wealth before the war and after the war. And you look at a house like this, you can see, I mean, you can imagine how expensive this would have been even after the Confederacy fell.
Wow.
And George Shrewsbury, he raises his family here. Georgiana is his wife, and Georgiana is also another interesting story because she is the daughter of Richard Holloway, who was a prolific Black carpenter before the Civil War and after.
Guys,
So-
this is so fascinating.
So you do have that very powerful Black story here.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, George, he dies within a few years. And another interesting tidbit is that Georgiana then marries her sister's widower. So
Wait, hold on.
So
Her what?
Georgiana has a sister, and unfortunately her sister did die in childbirth.
Okay.
And James DeCoster was her husband, and he is a widower. And in 1881, they get married here in this room. And we have the marriage certificate
stop.
that shows that Georgiana marries her brother-in-law in
Guys,
this
the
room.
tea is hot.
But what is interesting about this is you'll notice Richard Holloway's name
Oh my
is on
gosh.
this marriage certificate. And Richard Holloway is also the executor of George Shrewsbury's estate when he dies. And so if you can only imagine potentially
gosh.
Georgiana's father might be trying to strategically keep the wealth within the family by potentially procuring this marriage between James DeCoster, who is a bootmaker, and Georgiana.
Wow.
So it's a whole story about
This is wild.
another side of Charleston's history that we don't really talk a lot about is the Black journey before and after the Civil War, and that free journey of Reconstruction.
Yes,
And
which is so special. And I think to your point, understanding that, you know, we live in a neighborhood where this was the norm. I mean, we had no idea of that piece of history when we bought the house. But it just really, I mean, it literally, like, I have like goosebumps, you know, it just feels like it was meant to be in so many ways. Were there any kids? Did they have children?
Yes, so Georgiana comes into the marriage with children. Now she raised 5 children in this house.
Okay.
And as did James DeCoster, then he brings in his children. And what's interesting is that Georgiana's daughter, Eliza, she marries Edward Lawrence. And Edward Lawrence and her, they actually raised their family in this house. So there's a lot of generations within one household. Edward Lawrence is actually a teacher at Avery Normal Institute, which is the first school dedicated to Black secondary education after the Civil War in Charleston. And we do know that he's actually hosting classes here in this house after the Great Earthquake of 1886.
Wow.
Avery, the school, which is currently still standing, it is a masonry building. And after the earthquake, those masonry buildings didn't do so well. And so here we have this beautiful frame house, and he brings his students, and we do have record and announcements in newspapers of him hosting classes here for newly freed Black children to get their secondary education. So
I love
the truth has always been.
The truth is so much better. So, and we know, so the Avery Institute currently is still in the neighborhood. It's only a few blocks away. Is that the original building?
Yes. Yes. And so
they
if you
were
look
just
close,
coming here.
you can probably see the cracks. You can probably see the journey that building had, and to know that there is that connection between this physical house and that school, and potentially this room, this front room.
Oh my
I mean, we had a
gosh.
marriage here.
Oh my gosh.
And we don't know what else may have happened in this room, but things like this marriage certificate, like newspapers that tell us about those happenings of bringing the students here. I mean, it just, again, humanizes these 4 walls.
Yeah, that is so special. You did tell me, full disclosure, you gave me a little sneak peek of what's to come. And I would love for you to share with our viewers with Homeworthy the name that you found of the person who lived here.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. This was the one where she literally, I got an email and it was like, Jasmine, you'll never believe this. So I'll let you tell.
So one of the, again, this is where the house histories, the spiritual energy within these houses are incredible, and they surprise you in many ways. And early on, one of the first children to live in this house was a little girl named Josephine. So when I found that out, that one of the first children to grow up in this house was the same name of your little girl, who would again make the, I mean, you cannot make that stuff up. And that was a late night email that I couldn't help but send you. You wouldn't believe what we found.
But, you know, but it really, I think just hearing all that information and getting that history, like, it makes it all worth it, you know? It's like we're knocking down walls and like cleaning up nasty beer off of the floor, you know, but we're hearing these impactful, meaningful stories about people who lived here. We're finding these incredible, you know, Josephine connections. Like, like I literally, I always say Brittany does the Lord's work, and you do.
You can't make it up. The records like, just, they don't lie. And again, we don't know fully what may have happened in these homes. We don't know. I mean, we know that in all old homes, you're going to have experience that were not written on paper, right? That were not in a census, that were not on a marriage certificate. But with these documents, you can begin to put together the mosaic of how life may have been. And yes, they had emotions like sadness and happiness. They had loss, they had wins, they had births, they had deaths, all within these homes. And it's these records that they left behind that kind of help piece it together. And what's interesting is we don't add emotion into our house histories, because it's very important that we stick to just facts and we let the reader, the homeowner, really kind of, but a lot of times the facts speak for themselves in kind of building that energy and that spiritual story.
So one thing I would love to talk a little bit about, / have you talk about, is this mantle. So I know when we walked into this home, we were immediately struck by the details, just, you know, how beautiful it is, but what can you tell us about it? What do you know about it?
Yeah, so I think the fact that your house is being constructed by a master builder, again, a contractor, someone who's in the building industry in the late 1850s, we are going to see designs in this house that are so iconic mid-19th century. Marble arch mantelpiece with a center keystone. I mean, that is iconic. Also love the coal surround, which comes a little bit later, but this mantelpiece, the one in your other room, of course, we're seeing the same design. And again, that's all speaking towards this Italianate architectural style. But the other elements in this room are also kind of elaborating on that time period. And so we have beautiful, thick plaster cornice work within this room. You see acanthus leaves, you see a center medallion. You also see thick baseboards, thick window trim, and notice how big your windows are.
I mean, we look at my windows and also look at my paper shades. Renovation light.
But again, that's part of that kind of, really we start to see in the 1820s, 1830s, people starting to design these houses for entertainment, really, and it's at that time, the early 19th century, we start to see elements getting bigger and thicker and more grand, and especially in the Greek Revival architectural style, and as we carried into the Italianate, again, mid-19th century, we're seeing all this here. Think big, bold, but classically inspired.
Yes.
And that's what
Would you say that this style and, you know, this level of detail, was that typical for homes in this neighborhood at the time?
This is going to be on the higher end. So we are going to see, I mean, this plaster cornice work, I do see in other homes in Charleston. Now, the homes I'm thinking about are in all different parts of the city, but we do see in this section of the peninsula it really evolving in that kind of second quarter of the 19th century. So when this neighborhood starts to evolve, and think about it, this aspect, this portion of the peninsula, people could build on bigger lots. They were getting away from the dense historic city center and kind of coming out onto this western edge where they had bigger lots to kind of build bigger estates, bigger homes. And in turn, they're starting to use these architectural styles as expression. And so odds are you are going to find houses in this part of the city with that kind of Italianate, iconic style. And that really speaks to what's happening in this part of the peninsula at that time.
It's so special. I mean, we talk about the medallion, and honestly, I look at it and I'm like, oh my God, this fan, why is this fan still here? But you know, it's the
evolution.
It's the evolution, right?
So I want to show you the stairs because I really feel like the stairs are such a centerpiece when you walk in, but they hold such characteristic features of the mid-19th century as well. So let's go look at the stairs.
Let's go.
So when we head into the center hall, one, you can see how thick this trim is.
Yes.
Right? We come in to a very high ceiling. You can almost see to the layers of paint and the plaster work, which I know. Which again, speaks to the evolution, but you walk in and you come to this flared stair, which again is so iconic of that mid-19th century. Our bold, beautiful newel post. Again, we really start to see that evolving.
This like beautiful detail, even on the top.
And this is, again, iconic of that time period. We have the scrolled brackets along the stair and a thick balustrade. I mean, again, it's making a statement as you come in with these high ceilings, but the tall, lean, you feel like the tall, lean openings, that's where that Italianate style is starting to come in. Everything kind of gets taller and more narrow, but still with that thick accent.
Yes, I love it. So now, Brittany, I would love for us to go out onto the piazza, and I have so many questions for you. I hope you have some information for me. You ready?
Let's go.
All right, let's do it. If I can open the door. These are old, heavy doors. This, Brittany, isn't this the original door?
It is giving that kind of mid-19th century feel. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if there was glass originally in here.
No!
I wouldn't be surprised. I'm just saying.
Wait,
there are other homes erected at this time period where we actually have photographs in the late 19th century that show this style door with glass.
Okay, so when we talk about adding some brightness and some more natural light into the home, glass.
Well, think about it too, because this is a time period where we don't have electricity.
We don't have electricity.
We do have our beautiful transoms. Now, all of these older homes are going to have these transoms above their door, most of these older homes. And that is ventilation, air. But you had to get light and especially airflow in Charleston. And that's another thing. Homeowners, if they were wealthy enough, were going to play with colors and patterns to help illuminate rooms even in the nighttime. And I think spaces that we think were shuttered and dark were actually very light. And they had to be. They had to be.
So let's go out onto the piazza.
You come out to the piazza and we see how big and wide, right? And historically, this piazza did turn. And what's fascinating is you still have that preserved. And
no, we still have it. And I think there's a detail that's right on the corner where it turns that our architect has told us we cannot get rid of.
Wait, show me.
So it's back here, and I think, we love the scale of everything. So this is where you're going to see chaos again. The renovation journey that we're going on, you see pretty, but then real life is around the corner. But it's this little detail.
Oh, the beading. Okay.
Right?
Yes. So that
this is wild. I mean, it's so fascinating that, to your point, these were master craftsmen. Someone made this by hand.
That's the thing with this specific piazza. You have these fluted Doric columns. You have this little detail. And you come out and you feel the grandness. And if you think about it, if you are a master builder and if you are in the construction industry and this is your home, you probably are pulling out all the stops.
Right.
And historically, we used to have water. Right here. And so
they have water views. That's amazing.
You are getting that airflow off these marshes, off this canal. And over time, of course, we know that Charleston neighborhoods have evolved and that gets infilled. And that aspect is gone, but that was the point of these piazzas. And what I love about this vista here, you can see the slantedness of it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And most
so I know can you see it here, or is it kind of better to see it by the door? When you look at the door,
you can see they're specifically using it for rain runoff. And many people believe, Charleston homes are sinking, it's slanted, but most of the time it's a technology, it's a building technique they're using for these piazzas so people can use them, sleep on them, but also have the rain and anything kind of run off and then still be usable.
Yes.
So that is purposeful.
Fascinating. Thank you. I love all of this. This is so exciting. So now we're going to walk out to the front of the house, and I'm super excited for Brittany to share with us all that she has learned and all that she knows about some of the exterior details.
So again, what makes your house so fascinating is that it is, the interior detail is one thing where it's showing us and telling us its age and evolution, and it is so intact, but also the exterior as well. And you will see if you look throughout the street, your house stands out. The high style detailing is unlike any that we really see in this on this block alone. And when we look up, and of course that's the most important thing to do when you're walking in a historic city is to look up, we see that thick cornice work supported by those really big brackets. We see our Palladian window, and we know from that 1860s aerial, this is all original fabric. All original fabric. And again, it's speaking to that mid-19th century architectural trends. And again, if you had wealth, if you had the means, and we know this is being erected by a master builder, someone in the building industry as his own dwelling. And so potentially he's putting all that detail that is on trend, all the materials he has access to, all the craftspeople he has access to design his own house in an iconic mid-19th century dwelling.
I love that. I love that. You know, and it's so fascinating because when we bought the house, we had no idea this, you know, this detail. You know, we just were looking at it from kind of a visual aesthetic, you know, perspective, and knew that the details were beautiful, knew that there were some elements that felt grand, that felt special. But I think to hear you really, you know, find the meaning and share all of those details, share this information, it just, it makes it all worth it. You know, there's still so much more for us to do. Like, we're talking about, you know, the cornice and all the details, but then like we have a roof that is crumbling, you know, so that's great. You know, lights that need to be replaced, you know, those sorts of cosmetic things, but it's just so fascinating that the structure, the integrity of this home is still intact.
And it's telling you its story. We always say in the world of historic research and the study of historic architecture that the building is the greatest source. So go to the building, look at it, read it if you can, and literally read it. Read the architecture, try and figure out the evolution. And odds are the building is physically telling you its story way before you open up any document or history book. And it's details like that, of that thick cornice work, of the brackets, and all the interior details that are telling us the journey of that mid-19th century origin. And then, of course, with each new family, changes happen.
But we're not changing the exterior.
But you're not changing the exterior.
So speaking of the history, Brittany and I are going to walk over to St. Mark's Episcopal Church, which is here in the neighborhood, and she is going to tell us a little bit more about the church and its connection to our home. So let's go. So now we're here in St. Mark's Episcopal Church, and I'm so excited. Brittany has offered to tell us more about the church, what makes it so special in this neighborhood, what makes it special to the previous owners of my home, and I'm just excited to learn more. So
yes, I think this is very relevant that we're standing within the sanctuary here in St. Mark's. So we are just around the corner in the same neighborhood of where George Shrewsbury and Georgiana would have raised their family. Now, again, they were part of that free black elite prior to the Civil War, and they were part of the same group of people that would have founded St. Mark's. On Easter Sunday in 1865, this congregation was established, but we are standing in an 1870s sanctuary. So there was a few years before they built the formal sanctuary, and it was architecturally designed. So I think it's really important that we look at the architecture and we see how formalized and how grand it is. And it was established by a group of families, part of that Brown elite that George Shrewsbury, Richard Holloway, and even James DeCoster were a part of before the Civil War and absolutely after. And what's really great is that when you walk along the sanctuary and you see the stained glass, you will see some of those names. You may even see DeCoster, DeCosta, some different ways of spelling it. Again, this was part of that Black elite, and their descendants still worship here.
This is fascinating.
So this would have been...
Can we look at some of this?
Yeah, I mean, even if you look at the names, and again, churches were the center of communities. And so you can imagine this church is in the residential neighborhood. So you can imagine the headquarters it would have served as, both culturally, socially, perhaps politically. And it's still standing.
That is wild. I mean, just to give you guys some context, I mean, our home is 2 minutes away. I mean, it's literally around the corner. So to think about, you know, the residents who lived in our home, so Shrewsbury, DeCosta, all of those families, literally just, maybe they were walking, I don't know, maybe they had their like horse and carriage, I don't know.
Probably,
but whatever they were doing, it took them 30 seconds to get to this place of worship. And I think it's so fascinating that this is the original structure, right?
Yeah, from the 1870s. So this would have been their first formal sanctuary that they would have worshiped under. And we do know that there are a few other Black churches in the area, but I think it's important to note that after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, there was a layered story happening with the newly free Black citizens and with those Black citizens that had already been free prior to the Civil War.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, I guess that's when you're talking about kind of like the Brown elite. And do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, again, I think it's such a layered story because you can imagine when this congregation was founded on Easter Sunday in 1865, at that point, they had already established wealth. They had been free. And yes, especially in a city like Charleston, there were definitely regulations as war got closer for any Black citizen, free or enslaved. But after the Civil War, there was a movement to distance themselves from potentially those Black citizens that had been enslaved. And so St. Mark's has that story, has that underlying story of a cultural institution formed by that group of people. And I think it's something we need to talk about and just to go into that layered story of Reconstruction.
Yeah, I mean, I find that to be so fascinating. I think in so many of these southern cities, you know, Charleston, New Orleans, you know, throughout the South, you hear about the Brown elite or, you know, brown paper bag test or different, you know, whatever was going on then. And I think it's okay and it's important for us to talk about that. And I think to understand that complicated history, because it's a part of Charleston. It's a part of so many of these southern cities. So, you know, and I think what the church is doing now, right, to kind of...
The church today, it's an incredible congregation, again, of descendants from those original founders, but also people from the neighborhood, and trying to bring this church back into its role as being a community center for everyone that's living in this neighborhood, for anyone that's looking for a place to worship. And I think that's what St. Mark's really is this diverse group of individuals worshiping in this incredible building. As an architectural historian, I mean, just to stand in here and to walk up front and to see it in the middle of a residential neighborhood, but also to know that it has that
looking at
layered story that they're working through it and that they are actively telling and I just think this place is a definition of how, you know, we're in the 21st century, so how can these structures and these stories be relevant to us?
So one of the tidbits that I learned today was that this building is all wood. It is one of the only all wood buildings, is that right?
Well, I think when we think back, we definitely know it's a unique example still surviving.
Right, okay.
So we definitely know that. Now, of course, we've lost a lot of religious structures, especially potentially the smaller vernacular religious structures that would have been established potentially for those newly free Black citizens in the neighborhood. But what makes St. Mark's really unique is you see the frame structure, and it is grand and it is ornate. Even if you look at the sanctuary and our presence of dark wood and the stained glass. And now we do know, like anything else, sanctuaries have evolved and changed over time, but St. Mark's stays true to its historic integrity.
It's so special. It really is. It really is. I mean, and I just feel so privileged to be in a neighborhood where this exists. You know, these are things you read about, you know, things you see on TV, but to just walk around the corner and for this structure to still be here,
and it's just,
for descendants of, you know, the original founders to still be here, like, you know, I think, I mean, you said it best, like, you can't make this stuff up, right? It's like the truth is so, you know, so many times better than anything
any story.
Yeah.
And I think Lydia Frost, she was a female founder, and I think it's really important that we talk about that there was a woman involved in the founding of this church. And when you think about women's rights, especially being a Black woman in Charleston, I do think there's so many more stories to tell of the sanctuary. But the fact that we can relate it to your home, the fact that it's, again, I find that it's still being within that residential setting, that you just turn the corner and there it is. And it isn't too imposing where it's going to overtake the neighborhood, but it's there when you need it. And then you show up, and it's very powerful.
I love that. Brittany, thank you so much for sharing this piece of history with us, connecting it to our home. You know, it's just all of this. I'm so touched, and I'm so thrilled. I'm so thrilled to just learn about all of this.
So I want to show you, Jasmine, we found this really early 1860s aerial that we've highlighted the house and what it looks like at the time shortly after construction.
So it looks the same now, basically.
And that was what was so fascinating is that you can see, so when we talk about the architectural style and how this house has evolved, the original design is so intact, when it even down to the details. And so you can see on this aerial, we have our Palladian window, we have our thick cornice, bracketed cornice, we have our piazza, and you can see actually it's in a sea of Charleston single houses, and that's Charleston. From the mid-18th century all the way, even today, we're still constructing Charleston single houses. And again, that typology is very unique to Charleston. Even though if you do go down into Barbados, you may find buildings that are similar. And that is because there is such a heavy influence, colonial influence between Barbados and Charlestown. Again, that's a story for a different time.
Episode 3.
But the Charleston single house, they sit on, our lots here are long and narrow. Again, 1 room wide, 2 room deep with a side piazza, and the piazzas are always facing where you're going to get your breezes. So we're facing the water. So if you see a Charleston single house with its piazza facing another piazza, that was either a modern single house or one that's been moved from someplace else. And so if you look in this aerial, you can almost see there's water here. And one of the most interesting things about this side of the peninsula is that most of it was underwater. And I actually do have an original plat of this neighborhood that shows the creek coming in from the Ashley River. And so your lot is somewhere in here and fully immersed in a creek. But you can imagine when this building is going up in the late 1850s, we start to see this area of Charleston getting infilled and developed into these new residential neighborhoods. And the water was right there. It was right there. And so to erect these piazzas, it gets so hot here in the summer. Can you imagine not having a porch?
Oh my gosh. You know, and I think what's interesting about seeing this is that when it rains, our beautiful lot, this little creek just inches. It comes back. It inches into our front garden. We have the cistern. And, the cistern really does fill with water. So, one of the things that we did when we first, when we first bought the house was figure out how to not just encapsulate the crawl space, but we installed sunk pumps because we were like,
pumping
It
it
is
out.
not 1850s. We do not need water coming into our house right now. But this just goes to show, like, this was here this whole time. But good thing the house is still standing.
Yes,
so I think
and
we'll
it was
be okay.
built by a master, so you can just imagine, because it was built by someone in the building industry, you're probably going to get very good materials. You're going to get the best of the best. I mean, if he was a higher end builder, and as we can see, he certainly was, his access to materials, knowing how potentially the soils and the ground works in Charleston, I mean, and he's building it for himself. And so, I mean, there are a lot of mechanisms and technology he's probably utilizing, but odds are, once that water goes away, once they infill it, it is going to come back. But again, with these Charleston single houses, with these big piazzas, because our peninsula has evolved so much over the past 300 years, odds are that these piazzas, we're looking out onto creeks and canals and waterways that are much closer than they are today because we've infilled so much of our peninsula. So
that makes me feel good.
Yeah, right? I mean, you're not the only one. But this is an iconic single house, and one you'll see all over our peninsula. And again, a unique typology that uses both the geography, topography to its benefit. And that is 1 room wide, 2 room deep, getting those breezes from those piazzas and the nearby waterways.
So now that we've gone over the history of the home, we've gone to St. Mark's, given you guys a little taste of the neighborhood and kind of talked about the history of the neighborhood. Brittany, I would love to hear your take on the transformation. What has been going on in more recent years, and where the heck are we going?
So as we've talked about, we are in a section of the peninsula that was underwater historically. But as we get into the early to mid 19th century, we see infill happening, and that's when we see Louis Reb building this house. He's the master builder. He's designing it for his own family in iconic mid 19th century style. As the Civil War approaches and the Reb family, after Louis Reb's death, we do see other white merchants, white planting families renting this house. But beginning in the Reconstruction era is when we start to see the brown elite occupying these portions of the peninsula in these large homes. As time goes on, as we get into the early 20th century, we then begin to see these very large houses in this portion of the peninsula being occupied by almost working class, middle class families. And they're buying them. They're buying them and they're occupying portions of the house, and they're beginning to rent rooms to other working and middle class citizens.
Were they buying or renting like the entire home? Like, I mean, we know a lot of these homes are kind of laid out with kind of the main home, a kitchen house, like what was going on there?
So we see what happens most often throughout the peninsula, and this is as we get into the 1930s, World War II, we begin to see these main houses actually being subdivided into apartments where the family that owns the house maybe is occupying the main floor bedrooms, but the upper floors are being rented to what are considered boarders or lodgers. We also know that the outbuildings by this time are being transitioned into secondary dwellings, so they're becoming rental units. And especially around World War II, Charleston's population doubles. So during the wartime years, we have the Charleston Navy base. Charleston becomes a hotbed for naval activity. I mean, it is one of the biggest disembarkment ports in America for World War II.
Wow.
And after the war, people don't leave. And so we begin to see...
I mean, but why would you?
I know, that's what... Imagine being,
amazing.
you know, from other parts of the country getting stationed here in Charleston and being like, oh, okay.
That's great.
That's why I love to meet people who come from members of their family that are in Charleston because of World War II. But that is when we start to see these kind of mass subdivisions happening, especially on this street.
Wow.
These large homes become subdivided for apartments, and that in turn leads us to what begins to happen in the late 20th century and early 2000s with the College of Charleston. We see college students, people occupying these houses, people buying them specifically to subdivide them into college apartments.
Yeah, and so that's what we saw. So, you know, when we moved here in 2021, I believe, you could not tell me to come down the street and buy a house.
Here, This is even in the 1970s, and you can already tell it's beginning to kind of,
Yeah.
once the apartments go in, you start to get
Well,
the
people
feel.
stop. Yeah, people stop maintaining these, these beautiful homes. So it's funny because when we bought the house in 2022, the yard actually sort of looked like this. I think maybe there are like a couple of palm trees, but like this is basically what it looked like. But that is what we saw, and I think we were so hesitant at first because we were like, no, they're college kids and the street is, has college kids. But when we walked in and just saw the bones and the fact that so much of that original detail was still intact, it was a blessing and a curse, right? No one had cared enough to come in and rip out the detail. They just cared enough to come in and put, bathrooms in every single room, and
thank God that they just added and didn't take away. We have a lot of plumbing.
Yeah. But what do you see now as kind of the evolution? Like, do you think we're still in that space, or how do you think things are changing?
I think, especially, your street here, we are beginning to see these houses return back to single-family dwellings, which is you could not wish for anything better, right? And now we understand with any college campus, there's this need for housing. And so we do have that still happening here on our peninsula, but to have families back on these streets, and we see it all over now happening, of these great old buildings that have been subdivided. And it goes to exactly what you said. Thank gosh they didn't remove, because that takes money. They added. And so when you can begin to then undo the layers to find the gems that still exist. This street I have such hope for, and a lot of the streets surrounding here, that we can get more families. You talk to older Charlestonians and they remember kids playing in the street, riding bikes, and that's, I think, when you think about Charleston and its history, it was a small town. And it's not anymore. We're seeing a lot of evolution happen on our city streets, and to try and maintain that character and integrity, I think, is a priority for all of us preservationists and homeowners that occupy and take over these historic homes. Like, thank you, because it's not an easy task. But that is the key to maybe maintaining the character that everyone loves so much about Charleston, is to keep the people back in the peninsula and the families.
Yes. Wow. Like, truly, wow. I'm overwhelmed. I really am. Brittany, thank you so much for all you've done. Your work, when you started sending the emails, this information, like, the love that you give. I know, but the fact that you give this much love and care and attention to every single home that you do is beyond me. So thank you. And I'm just so thrilled. So thank you. Homeworthy, this has been a blast, and I hope you enjoyed hearing from Brittany, and I will see you guys next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to go to homeworthy.com for exclusive content, shopping guides, and so much more.